It's Friday. Welcome, guys.
Happy
I'm
Friday.
Chad Westbrook. I am here with Mr. Riley.
How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good. I'm doing good. I'm excited
Good.
about this because we're going to get to really dive into residential versus commercial. And when we were talking about this, like, man, well, first off, we got to define residential and we got to define commercial because I have been in more conversations than I want to about the difference between the two. And let's just classify it to start. So I'm excited to talk about this and dive in. So I'm going to ask you, Will, when I say residential, what do you think? Like, what's your definition of residential?
Yes. So I classically, like most, I believe, jump right to I own my own home. It's a shingle home, and that's the majority of residential, right? That's where it starts. And it branches out from there into, residential that has metal, residential that has tile, higher end homes. But then it gets into this HOAs where they're larger buildings, but their shingle is that residential. I would argue that it's more commercial than residential, and that the decision making process for, let's say, HOAs is very much so in line with commercial. So to me, it almost goes back to like, hey, it's either sloped or it's low slope. And that's not the best term to define it all because there's variances. But when you ask me, what's residential? Yeah, I go to the homeowner owns his home or her owns their home, and that's the majority of it. Do you see it? Same.
I do, like, right? So, like, as I was introduced to the industry, what, 20 years ago, and we started talking residential versus commercial. Yes, I see that. But what I typically see within contractors is that there is a skewed side of it. And not that it's right or wrong, it's just skewed. Because if I've been inside certain areas where they've classified the business as residential, if people are living in the building. Now, this means it can be a TPO roof, and if it's a residence, then that's considered the residential side. I've also been in the side. If it's shingle, it's residential, right? We don't care if it could be a million square foot residential complex, right, or whatever it is, and it's still residential. So I think that's one really, really big thing is to be able to set the pace for what we're going to be talking about is what is residential and what is commercial, because I think just the inconsistency, trying to choose my words right here, right? But the inconsistency of definition of residential to commercial, I think can really impact, I think, our conversations today and then also some of the value that contractors take out of it.
Incredibly fair too. And also I see it in groups or I see it in other areas of discussion where the advice that you're given, whether it's a sales coaching advice on YouTube or it's a webinar that you're watching, that the advice, if not portrayed to the right audience, could be taken incorrectly. I've seen a lot of good discussions around how to sell facility managers that are responsible for HOAs versus how to sell a homeowner. Those are way different. So I think at the end of the day, as long as we're aligned with who the buyer is and what we're talking about separates the types of buyers, then this could be hopefully impactful.
I think that's something that I can easily kind of wrap my head around, right? Because if we start talking about the type of building and what roof is on it, and if people are living in it or not living in it, I mean that creates a variable. So I love that. Who's buying is really what we're focused around. Good with that.
Yeah. Yep.
So what is the biggest difference? And I know I say biggest, most significant, whatever you want to say, between residential and commercial.
Well, I think if you're asking me, if what's the biggest difference between a residential contractor and a commercial contractor, we'll say that they are two completely different types of models, right? Residential, you need volume to be able to get out in front of as many homes as possible to acquire the most amount of leads, and then you need to be able to convert those into sales and then track them. And it's almost interesting because you track the installations almost like you track work orders because they're so fast. They're 1 day, 2 day projects in most cases. You're also straddling the insurance world too, which is another segment in itself, a completely different sales cycle in itself. But residential contractor, that negotiates their own sales plus does insurance work. That model is completely different than a commercial roofing contractor that services flat roofs or low slope roofs, replacements, maybe general construction in the mix as well. So if we were to talk about, those are two completely different types of companies. And I think what we're getting at, or what you're about to get at, and pardon me if I'm jumping ahead, is why go from residential into commercial? And you've dealt with a lot of contractors that have made that jump. You call it 0 to 1, in variances of that. And so have I. So back in 2010 to 2017, I worked with a lot of contractors just implementing software across the board, all shapes and sizes. That was my first exposure to like what it's like on the residential side. But then in 2017, I actually got to go work for a roofing contractor, and we did do residential sales. Now we didn't; it wasn't like we were trying to get a lot of that. It was like friends and family. All right, we're going to take care of you, enough to learn about it. But our primary business was the commercial side. So let's ask you kind of this question here to start it off a little bit deeper. Why would a contractor want to get into commercial?
My side is consistency, right? And I'm going to answer one other question because when I asked you that question, I had an idea in my head, and your answer was a little bit different than me. The biggest difference between commercial and residential, in my opinion, is that residential is spending their own money. Typically in commercial, they're spending someone else's money.
Hmm.
So the buying process changes massively because if I have to write a check that comes out of my bank account that I have to personally write and hand to them, and they come over and I have to hand that check over to them or cash or whatever it is, right? Like that's a very emotional thing. And especially with the house is my castle. That's where I drive home every single day. And not to mention when we talk about residential, right? Most of the time you can see those roofs. And that's a very different world, right? When I pull into my house every single day and I see this brand new, beautiful slate roof, I'm just proud of it. Like I got my money's worth, right? Like it's beautiful. It's the most beautiful house in the neighborhood. Or I don't have slate, by the way, but whatever it is, right? Um, that's residential, and I feel that's a very, very unique situation because when you transfer to commercial, I always kind of set aside. No one cares about the roof because no one sees it, right? It doesn't matter how beautiful the roof is. You got parapet walls that are 10 foot up, and you'll never see it. It just keeps water out. It's out of sight, out of mind. So it becomes a lot less of this like staple of your house, right? Almost as much as the siding or whatever else might come to it, and it becomes more of an afterthought. The second part of it is that they're spending someone else's money typically because you're talking to a maintenance manager, a facility manager, a property manager, anyone less than an owner. They're spending someone else's money. Now they have a job, right, to be able to manage that asset, but it's not them writing the check. I always have this conversation with owners when we run into issues with different employees, right? If you had to write the check yourself, would you write it? And most of the time that changes every single answer I get. It's like, would you write him a check today for this dollar amount based upon the work that he did this week? And I know I'm going extreme with that, but bring that back in. When you deal with a residential individual, they're writing a check out of their pocket that comes out of their account that they can log into and see that dollar amount, whether it's there or not there. That's emotional. When you start working in a commercial side, you're using, I don't want to say this in a mean way, but you're using someone else's money. Right? They submit a PO and it gets paid, or they submit a budget request and it gets approved. They don't see that check go out. They don't see any of that stuff. So it becomes a little bit less of an emotional buy. And that's where like the data cell and like all that different stuff comes into play, especially for those like real trusted advisor contractors, that it's a completely different play. But to be able to answer your question in my side, consistency. In residential, you replace the roof and ultimately you don't go back until it gets blown off, or 10 years, 15, 20 years down the road, it needs to be replaced again. It doesn't happen in commercial, right? Commercial is a constant flow, especially with the foot traffic and everything else that comes up. It's such a different world that I can say it should be a constant flow and a constant relationship versus the one and done kind of sale. So that's my
I think
piece
that's
on
fair.
too.
No, it's completely fair. And you're only as good as your last weeks of sales. So you have to consistently be selling. So there are vast differences. I like the answer. So consistency. And I haven't really thought about it that way, how fruitful commercial could be for contractors and providing that consistency. And for most, they don't go into it thinking, I want consistency. I think for most residential contractors, it's intimidating to take that leap from shingle replacement into flat roof because, and I work with several where I don't know enough about TPO. I don't know enough about PVC. What if like I sell a job, how am I going to get it to work and or get it done correctly? How am I going to pay for all these materials? That's intimidating. And I think for
For
it,
real.
it
Like
is.
$2,000 of material for a residential side, it's 20,000 for the commercial job, right? Like that's real, 100%.
Yeah, and I go back into why would I want to move from residential to commercial? And I think the most obvious answer is more sales, more money. I could do one large replacement on the commercial side that equals 20 different sales I make on the residential side. So it makes sense, right? But then the next part to that is timing, right? Does the timing make sense? Do I have the opportunity in front of me? Do I have the workforce required to do the work? And it all kind of has to come together. So I think without the opportunities presenting itself at the right point of time, then, we're not going to make the jump. And I see a lot of contractors that do make the jump that easily go right back to residential. Do you see that happening too? Where it's like, okay, I got my job, first commercial job and I did the project, but then I didn't really have enough to keep it going and I just kind of revert back.
Change is hard. Habits are easy, especially after they're formed. So if you've been inside residential roofing for, let's just say, most of your career and you're trying to dabble into it, I think of one contractor specifically in the Florida market that I was working with, and he was head on. Like, I'm growing, we're doing a commercial side, right? We're growing this, da 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 da, doing all the different things. And this was not recently with the hurricanes. This was years back. But a hurricane came in, and he literally called me up, and he's like, "Dude." He's like, I can just I know how to do this. He's like, I got the residential side. He's like, I'm just going back to it because this is what I know. He's like, the commercial side is harder than I thought it would be. He's like, I'm going back. So yeah, I do run into that, and I'll say habit is probably the biggest thing, right? Of like truly outlining if we're going to do commercial jobs, yeah, it is more money. Yeah, there is more profitability into it. Now, you mentioned some of the risk side to it, but I'll say the biggest killer of reverting is habit, right? This is what I know how to do. This is how I do it. Um, that's a huge, huge part that I see.
Yeah, yeah. And being able to successfully take that step and then stay within the commercial side if you can. Um, it's easy to go back to what we know. It's easy to go back to what we're comfortable doing. But then what about the contractors that made that gap, made that step, but with the least amount of risk? And I want to make mention of the contractors that found a way through HOAs to get into commercial because the HOAs, as you talked about, buyers being the differentiator between who's commercial, who's residential. HOA boards are like commercial companies. They make decisions like commercial companies. And I could name several contractors that landed multiple HOAs, and then that allowed them to cash flow into the commercial world. But yes, they did have to learn flat roof along the way. Yes, they did have to get consistency and crews availability along the way. But that was a perfect way in. And the other way in that I'm seeing now more than ever is service being that entry level barrier because it's far less intimidating to go sell a couple of pipe boots or curb replacement or demoing units or whatever it is and to get your foot in the door into the commercial side. So what do you think about those two entry points, HOAs and service? And you can talk to whatever you like.
So the HOA side, absolutely, right? Because you're still doing what you know how to do, right? Typically, that's the shingle side of it, right? So you're not completely out of your comfort zone, but it is a little bit, it is a step, like you said. I like that, right? It is a step to dealing with a more professional buyer because you are getting to that point again where they're not spending their money. If we're dealing with, let's just say an HOA, they're dealing with a CAM, a common area maintenance, or whatever we want to call it, HOA, right? Like they're dealing with a fund, so you are starting to be able to make that change getting there. The conversation that I typically have is that if you are an established and successful residential contractor, think about what your clients do professionally. And the chances are is that you already have ins in the commercial side if you're looking to be able to do that. So you just don't have to start over. It's not like draw a line in the sand and I'm going to be a commercial roofing contractor and I'm going to start from zero tomorrow. The chances are the roofs that you're putting on, those individuals have connections or have different people that they can introduce you to, refer you to, or whatever else it might be to be able to start making that path, right? And that's a little bit more of, throwing you out to the water and seeing if you can swim. But again, we're talking about if we're going to make that switch of residential into commercial and I want to do it, you don't have to start at zero, right? You're already working with residential individuals that drive home every single day from their place of work. That's the first place that I would start, right? To be able to move that. But I love the HOA side. I love that side because again, it keeps you in your realm of, hey, all of my crews, all of my subcontractors, they're all shingle. How do I move into commercial if everything I know is about shingle? And I love that part, right? Of like, I don't know enough about EPDM or TPO or built up or wherever it is. I think that the multifamily side could be a beautiful transfer into that because you're dealing with a
Well,
different buyer, but you're still there. So I like that.
yeah, and I think regardless, right? If we're all we know is residential, we want to get into commercial, like we're going to have to learn and be experts on commercial roofs. But that takes time, and it doesn't happen overnight. If we make the decision today that I need to convert to commercial, then I should have a plan in place. And it's not going to be all my work is now commercial. Like that's going to take a few years. So a lot of companies that I talk with, they give me a ratio. Yeah, 50% residential, 50% commercial. Next year, our goal is X, right? We want to be 30% residential, 70% commercial, and it starts to tip over in that commercial direction. But the most successful companies I see doing it, they have made a plan and then have gone away from relying on subcrews. Because in order to be a commercial or be successful in commercial, I believe you need to have in-house capabilities to be able to control the start date, to control when materials drop, to control, especially if you're doing service. Like you need to be able to control the image. There's so much that goes into it. If you're starting off in commercial for the first time, customer looks at your website, it's all shingles. There's not a lot of trust there. And then you send a subcontractor out with the blank truck with the magnet on the side, right? It's like there's a lot of variables that go into it. But my whole point here is having that plan, knowing it's going to take time, but making sure that that is what you want to do. Is your company's trajectory, your goal to be 100% commercial? Maybe you don't want to be. Maybe you just want to diversify your offering. Maybe you want to be less risky by having just one product that you sell. So you want to create more products. Commercial is a great way to do that. We don't have to just go out and sell new roofs or just bid jobs just to, get large projects. We could diversify. So a lot of what Chad and I talk about is doing service, getting in, retaining clients, taking care of those customers. And then the byproduct of that equals a lot of these negotiated higher margin type sales. It's a beautiful thing. And I just want that for every contractor that desires commercial.
I'm going to go into a little bit on some of the stuff I do on a leadership side. Why? Why? Why do you want to go into this? Because that's the deciding factor, right? If you can't answer why, or if you respond with what I call shiny things, which is like, oh, that's cool. Like, oh man, because my friend's doing it. My friend's doing that. I want to do that. No. That doesn't count. Why? That's number one. You have to answer the why that you're looking to be able to make this change in your business. Because the easy thing to do is just continue doing what you're doing. Right? We talked about habit being the number one reason that people revert, right? All of a sudden we get a hailstorm in the Colorado Front Range and all of a sudden you're back to storm chasing. I've been there. I've seen it. Like I literally have great relationships with residential contractors that went back. And when I look back on it, the why wasn't big enough and I didn't go deep enough into the why, right? Or maybe the why was maybe it was just a gap filler to be able to get there. But what I'm telling you guys is number one, why? Okay, you have to be able to answer that question and answer that question in detail. Now, part two to this is what makes it hard. What's the measurable within your company that you want to change? Because if we're going to do something, if we're going to apply time, effort, energy, money into something, what's the change? Because if you can't quantify it, it makes it very hard to define success, right? Was it successful? It's like, I felt it was. Like, yeah, I think so. Like, if I feel good in my gut, like, yeah, of course. That's not, I mean, when we're talking about true business growth, right? That's not good enough. That'll never fly at the bank. That'll never fly anywhere when you're looking to get a loan. It's like, no, no, I felt it worked good. What's the measurable? So number one, why? Why do you want to make that change? And number two, what's going to change within your business? So Will, you said part of it, right? Well, I want to do it because of X. And what's the measurable? I'd like 30, I think you said 30, right? 30% of my business to be commercial by the end of 2025. Beautiful. Now we got a measurement, right? Now we got the first measurement to be able to say, okay, well, if we do $1 million and you want 30% of it to be commercial, that means we need $300,000 inside commercial revenue. Now I can start building a plan around that, right? Like that's when things start to get clear. But if we don't understand why and we don't understand what measurement inside the business is going to change, I don't care if it's revenue. I don't care if it's gross margin. I don't care if it's the number of clients you have. We're going to get more clients with commercial. That's great. How many more? And how does it affect that number? Right. And I share that. I know I'd be kind of direct with that, but that's really what I go into is to be able to what's the why, right? Because everybody has their own why. Will, you mentioned a handful of them, right? And you can't have like 7 whys because then it just gets cloudy. Just gets cloudy and it gets hard. And it just goes back to, I felt that was a good idea. I felt we did good. I want to help you guys have measurable increases within your business, right? That we know it was great. How do I know it was great? Because we're at 28% on a goal of 30. Did we miss it? Yeah. But guess what? We went from 0 to 28, and that's beautiful. So like those are the things that I look at, especially when we're talking about residential and commercial and how does all of that stuff play? There are tons and tons of benefits of going into commercial, and there's ways to be able to make that transfer. But the number one thing that matters is why. Because if you're just trying to increase top line margin, well, go bid some GC work, right? If you get one, that's great, right? You can funnel some cash in and doesn't take a lot of relationship building. But if you're looking to be able to do it to create consistent revenue, well, now we're going into a private negotiated world. Now you got to have a relationship with them. It's just not how good your GC number was. So there's a lot that changes within the plan of how you go from commercial to residential. And Will, you said it best, service. Service is, I don't want to say simple, right? Because it is complicated, right? It comes easier to some than others, but that's your entry in. Being able to fix a roof leak, being able to help them get out of what is one of the most disruptive times that a business will have. And Will, I think I mentioned to you before we jumped on, right? Like in the commercial world, I can have a leak in my house or have some damaged drywall in my house and be okay. That cannot happen with craft manufacturing. You cannot have an FDA organization. International Paper cannot have water dripping on their millions of linear feet of paper. Right? The commercial side of the world the commercial industry runs the world. So there's some big benefits to it. But again, it's asking that one question, why? And that's what I would challenge everybody here. If you're residential and you're thinking about it, why? What is it? Part two to that is what's the measurable? What number in your business is going to change if you successfully executed this? Then we can create the plan on how to get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think all of what you're saying is on the business end of it, because we need to have a plan. In a perfect world, that plan is something that we could measure and work towards. Somewhere along the way, we're, I mean, essentially we're using residential to fund the creation of the commercial side, assuming this is a contractor switching or changing or evolving, whatever you want to call it, using residential cash to fund the creation of our commercial division. And along the way, you're going to need to acquire the knowledge of these roof systems. You're going to need to be surrounded by people that also obtain and possess that knowledge. You're going to need people that will run the crews that also possess that knowledge. And it's not as simple as just hiring someone from another roofing company. right? I think there's a large risk. See a lot of contractors do that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I see it as a large risk if the owner hasn't gone through those steps to obtain that knowledge, and that takes time. You mentioned it. Service is a great entry point, low risk. Let's start dabbling in commercial. I think that the owner should be able to learn how to properly make the repairs, how to properly spec the roof systems, how to properly measure, how to properly get certified by manufacturers. These are all things that we need to do in order to grow a commercial division or company. And then as that comfort level is achieved by the owner, now we're starting to put people in those places. And that means different things to different contractors. If it's the service effort we're going to start with, well, I need someone to manage that service effort. Well, then what? I need someone to manage our sales efforts. What does that mean? That means that we need to go out and continuously find more work. We need to take the work that our service is encountering and convert that into more work. And then you need to have someone that's over the production side, right? So to me, I think it's all owner. And it's the most beautiful thing about all these roofing companies is all the information is so top heavy. It's all in the owner's head. And then the rate of which the information's transferred is the rate of which the contractor grows. So the faster you can disperse what's in the owner's head, and I used to see it, I'd be at this roofing company, and Dustin had all the answers, and all these people would walk in with this problem or that problem. We don't have materials, and he'd just boom, solve this, solve that, change the spec, go up and over the wall over here, and it's a beautiful thing. But then how do you transfer that into other people? And I think that's key to grow a commercial division. But then eventually you're going to need a project, someone over production, scheduling ordering the materials, getting the materials, planning the crews, making sure the crews are doing the right work. And then you need accounting. Of course you need accounting. But it doesn't all happen overnight. So when I mentioned earlier, it's this weighted, percentage of, I do X in commercial, I do X in residential. But I'll tell you what's not scary is the drive to want to do it, because everyone I ask, why do you want to get a commercial? Dude, money, duh. Yeah, larger jobs. I don't have to sell as much. Okay, that's a beautiful thing. You got to go through all these steps I mentioned to be able to get there properly. Sorry, that's just what's required.
We're at the point where if you're cool with it, I would love to give some resources, right? Because everything you're
Yep.
talking about, learning all that kind of different stuff. Now, first off, I already, well, I can't say already. First off, is that as you continue to be able to grow your business, RT3, so it's Roofing Technology Think Tank, has something called a business maturity guide. And I think it's roofingtechnologythinktank.com. If you go there, you should be able to find it inside resources. It's business maturity guide. It just kind of helps you understand as you make that switch what you need. So that's one area where I'm going to tell you to go. The second thing is that our industry talks a lot about industry standards. And when it comes to service, if you're looking to start your business or start, move into commercial on the service side, it's very, very hard to find that. And I'm going to tell you there's one place that I always go, and it's the NRCA. So National Roofing Contractors Association. So look it up, go to the NRCA, and they have, being part of the NRCA, I would say is a standard inside the commercial side, but they have something called a NRCA repair handbook. And it is almost anything that you guys can know, and it's so beautiful. So the PDF is a interactive PDF, so you can literally do TPO, and you can go directly to puncture. And not only is it text, it also gives you photos. And that becomes such a massive resource, not only to you as an owner, it's great, it's your technicians. Give it to your techs because they can look at it and know exactly what to do, and that becomes the repair industry standard. Now, if you're looking on a larger install side, almost every manufacturer has some type of continued education program. I'm going to say just ask about it. I've had manufacturers come out to my office when I was running divisions, and they brought 40 pipe boots, and we had an entire training session just on heat welding pipe boots. We had a competition on it, on who could do it the best, and then we gave out gift cards. Like, it can be fun. So don't be scared about some of the stuff like you don't know anything about the systems, you've never done it before. There is a massive, more than ever, there's more resources more than ever. That's what I should have said. There's more resources more than ever now to be able to help us learn the trade, right, of commercial roofing, and just ask the question. That's the biggest thing. Is like, hey, how do you do this, or where can I find this? And Will and myself are happy to be that conduit to get you to what you need. But I encourage you guys, if you want to go from residential, Will, you mentioned it, right? They're bigger contracts. You got to sell less. There's more profitability inside it. It's more, in my world, it's more consistent, right? Service is something that happens every single day. And so the residential side, it's hard. It's hard to have that consistency, right? And there's so much that you can do. We talk about safety. We talk about all kinds of different things that can happen from the commercial side. It's beautiful. I love it. I would never change anything for it. So if you guys are looking at making those changes from residential to commercial, you're going to get it from me. Do it. I love it. I love the industry. I love the people. I love the resources that we have. I love it. I love it. But just know there's more than enough people out there willing to help you make that step, especially, again, if you know your why, right? Then we get deeper into, okay, we understand the why. What's the measurable that's going to define success? Then it becomes fun because then we're creating a business around specifically, you mentioned top heavy, right? Game on. We're creating a business around your vision. That's the coolest part of all of this. So I'll shut up now, Will, and let you close out.
No, I think it's all good too. And the takeaways are that, understanding why to even go into commercial. I think that learning is the really big piece, and you need to be committed to learning. And as you mentioned, there's a lot of resources out there. And the other thing I'll mention on top of what you already said is that other contractors, they're not as guarded as you might think. I know a lot of owners that would love to share, would love to help you make a buddy, talk to other commercial roofing companies, even if they're in your own market. Don't be, I've seen that happen all the time where there's plenty of work to go around. And if you can get a friend in that same arena, then that's time well spent. So yeah, that's all I got to add, man. I appreciate the time and talking about going from residential into commercial.
As I mentioned in each one of these, my goal is to be able to raise the floor of the commercial world. And if today that's helping you guys make that transition from residential to commercial, I did my part. So appreciate it. Thank you for letting me be involved.
Yes, sir. See you next time.
See you.